This is a live look at the White House right now. President Trump is expected to meet with his national security team later today. They will reportedly be discussing any possible retaliation by Iran. That meeting scheduled to happen inside the Oval Office around noon.
Members of Congress are reacting to President Trump's unilateral decision to bomb 3 of Iran's nuclear sites. The responses range from high praise to calls for impeachment. The bulk of the president's political allies applaud the move, which was done without authorization from Congress. A few in the GOP are breaking from the president.
The Constitution requires Congress to weigh in on this. This was a bad move politically, but it's also just a bad move legally and constitutionally and policy-wise.
Democratic leaders, including top members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee, criticized the administration for only alerting Republican lawmakers before the strikes.
Texas leaders are also reacting to the president's order against Iran.
News 4 San Antonio's Christina De Leon has more on what local leaders are saying and what comes next. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning. Right now, just so you know, around 40,000 U.S. troops at several military bases in the Middle East remain on high alert. And for the most part, local leaders in and around the Texas area remain cautiously optimistic for the most part about these attacks. In fact, let's go straight to what they're saying. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas saying at this time there's no need to worry and we want to keep it that way. Texas stands with America's commander-in-chief. We will defend our community and support our troops. Henry Cuellar, the U.S. congressman from the 28th district, says Congress must play a decisive role in any decision involving the deployment of America's troops in harm's way. And the U.S. senator from Texas says, God bless the USA. This is what leadership on the world stage looks like. And we also got a chance to speak with Representative Joaquin Castro from our area about the strikes, and here's what he told us.
The best thing that we could hope for is that Iran does come to the negotiating table, that there is another chance for a diplomatic solution to containing Iran's nuclear program, because I do think that it should be contained. That's the best case scenario. That's what I hope President Trump will pursue.
Now, the CIA and other intelligence officials will brief members of Congress. That will happen tomorrow. The Senate Intel Committee will gather for a closed-door meeting, as you guys mentioned, and of course, we will continue to follow it every step of the way and bring you details on air and online as well at news4sanantonio.com. Reporting live, I'm Christina De Leon. We will send it back to you.
Thank you. About 5 minutes after 6 a.m. right now, there are anti-war protests going on around the country, including here in San Antonio. This was yesterday downtown at the Torch of Friendship. There was a banner that read, "No U.S.-Israeli war on Iran." We had a chance to speak to the organizer, who believes that U.S. taxpayers should not be paying for a war in the Middle East.
We oppose regime change. We oppose occupation and, oppose our tax dollars funding this. We should be funding programs here at home. We can see all the suffering happening all around us, and they never seem to have money to fund our needs here at home, but they have more than enough money to bomb people abroad.
There was a similar protest in Austin. Remember, you can get updates on the Middle East conflict online. You can go to our website, news4sa.com, and as always, follow us on all of our social media platforms.
More now on the big story we continue to follow concerning the U.S. bombing Iraq over the weekend. It's unclear what kind of fallout or risks the U.S. now faces as a result of joining the Israel-Iran conflict. Now, we spoke with Jeffrey Adicott, a law professor of the War Defense Project at St. Mary's University School of Law. He's also a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army. Adicott says President Trump was well within his legal rights to carry out the strike, pointing out that past presidents have used their commander-in-chief authority to take similar action. He also says the Constitution gives Trump the full authority to do so.
One thing is clear. If you're going to stop a radical regime from getting a nuclear weapon, you've got to do it before they get the weapon, not afterwards.
According to Adicott, President Trump now has 60 days to send a letter to Congress informing them that he used military force. Congress then can pass a resolution supporting what the president has done. One thing Adicott wants people to know is there are not going to be boots on the ground in Iran anytime soon.
The draft is not going to be reinstituted. We're not going to have to call up the National Guard. This is going to be an air campaign conducted by airplanes and planes off of ships, and maybe some of the ships getting involved with their payload from the sea into the land. There's not going to be any soldiers on the ground.
He says it's now up to Iran and whether they choose to surrender.
Well, this morning, global tensions are rising after the president ordered strikes on Iran's nuclear program over the weekend.
This marks the first U.S. direct military attack on Iran, raising questions on whether the U.S. will suffer possible retaliations. NBC's Alice Barr joins us live from Washington with the very latest. Good morning, Alice.
Good morning, Rita and David. And as the nation and the world are bracing for Iran's response, Israel and Iran are still trading fire. And Iran's top diplomat is now set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin to talk next steps. This morning, amid the fallout over U.S. airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, key questions remain, including the extent of the damage.
The strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Pentagon officials say it's too soon to know for sure. B-2 bombers are back home at their Missouri base as we get a first look at the Iranian targets struck, before and after images showing the massive impact on one of the nuclear facilities. And the looming question, how will Iran respond? President Trump promising far greater force if Iran does retaliate. Vice President Vance framing the U.S. strikes as a limited move aimed at pushing Iran toward peace.
We're not at war with Iran, we're at war with Iran's nuclear program.
While President Trump posted, quote, "If the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change?" That's a shift from his administration's messaging so far.
This mission was not and has not been about regime change.
And could add to concerns for many Republicans uneasy with another prolonged U.S. Middle East entanglement. GOP Representative Thomas Massie openly criticizing the president's move.
He promised us which we would put America first.
President Trump vowing to campaign against Massie, who joined many Democrats questioning whether the strikes were constitutional without congressional approval. Now, as anti-war protests break out across the U.S., huge billboards in Israel thanking President Trump. The Department of Homeland Security issued a new warning about heightened threats inside the U.S. from Iran. That after Iran threatened to activate sleeper cell terror inside the U.S. if attacked. According to 2 U.S. officials and a person with knowledge of the threat, the Trump administration is promising increased surveillance. David and Marisa.
Alice Barr, thank you.
6:34 right now. Iran's parliament moving forward with plans to close the Strait of Hormuz. If that does happen, oil and gas prices will likely go up here in Texas. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through that strait. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio calling on China to encourage Iran not to shut it down. He's also threatening consequences if they do close it. I want to show you a live picture of the White House this morning where the State Department has now issued a worldwide security warning for Americans following the U.S. strike on Iran, dubbed Iran Operation Midnight Hammer. President Trump says that if Iran retaliates, it will be met with even greater force than what was unleashed over the weekend. So the biggest question of all right now is what will Iran do next?
The world and United States military officials are waiting to see if the fighting escalates into a much bigger conflict in the Middle East. National correspondent Matt Galka reports from Washington.
Military officials praised the strikes on Iran in a secretive operation that targeted 3 of the country's nuclear sites.
Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction.
The world is waiting to see what Iran might do next now that the U.S. has gotten directly involved in the conflict supporting Israel. Iran's state media has already come out with frequent warnings, with this broadcast showing a map of U.S. bases in the region and a threat that every American citizen and soldier is now a legitimate target. Iran's foreign minister says the strikes will have long-lasting consequences.
What is completely sure is that Iran is entitled under Article 51 of the UN Charter to exercise its right of self-defense. And we will do that for sure.
There's around 40,000 U.S. troops in the region at multiple bases and embassies that have already been on high alert. Iran hit Tel Aviv with a missile barrage following the U.S. strikes, causing damage and reportedly wounding dozens. It's unclear whether Iran would try to directly strike American assets in the region or use proxies. Israel has been targeting Iranian military sites for more than a week. The U.S. issued its own warnings to Iran not to escalate the war, both abroad and domestically, through potential lone wolf terror attacks.
I think that we're prepared in the event that the Iranians do retaliate. But my message to the Iranians is it would be the stupidest thing in the world if they did. And we know that a lot of people who we don't have full accounting of were let in over the last 4 years under the Biden administration. We know that some of those people were on terrorism watch lists.
But there's also economic retaliation. Trying to cut off the Strait of Hormuz could spike oil prices.
Iran's options for retaliation are like the tactical equivalent of a suicide bombing. The blowback for them would be tremendous.
A bulletin issued Sunday from Homeland Security warned of a heightened terrorism threat environment, including cyber attacks inspired by the strikes on Iranian targets. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka.
In the middle of this historic war between Iran, Israel, and the United States, innocent people are being injured on all sides. This morning, Israel launched fresh airstrikes targeting military infrastructure in western Iran's Kermanshah city. And yesterday, Iran launched a missile strike on an affluent neighborhood in southern Israel near Tel Aviv. More than 20 people were injured in this strike, which left many buildings barely standing, if at all. Half a block away from where the missile struck, Jeremy Zetlin spent the day picking through the debris of his childhood home.
It's just things. It's nothing. This is not important, but it's just to.
Moving from one destroyed room to the next, Zetlin tried to separate the things that mattered from those that don't. In those moments, he's reminded of what's truly valuable.
This is not important, but it's just a symbol of how we're holding ourselves to be strong. It's hard.
Cleanup crews push piles of debris. Survivors return to grab what they can, many still shaken by what they survived and all they have lost. Meanwhile, huge billboards featuring President Trump's picture and a thank you message hang over highways and other locations in Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the president for taking action against Iran, calling him a tremendous friend of Israel.
Well, Texas leaders have been sounding off on the president's decision to bomb that nuclear facility. For some are for it and some are against it. So Senator John Cornyn says the president made both the courageous and correct decision to eliminate the Iranian nuclear threat. Governor Greg Abbott says, quote, he stands with the president and the United States of America. Now, local Congressman Joaquin Castro says that too often presidents mistake the initial acts of war as the conclusion to the conflict rather than the opening of Pandora's box. He goes on to say that appears to be the case with President Trump. These strikes on Iran are a dangerously escalatory step. He says the president has taken us to war with Iran with no debate, no authorization from Congress, and no explanation to the American people. The president and Benjamin Netanyahu's actions risk yet another protracted war in the Middle East, a war that the American people do not want. He says we must hold the administration accountable, and he is hoping diplomatic resolutions prevail.
I think we need to understand exactly what's at stake if the government of Iran collapses. What happened with Afghanistan and Iraq is that for a generation, there were terrorist units that basically franchised over parts of the Middle East and North Africa. And so the destabilization of those countries created more terrorist units out there around.
Well, on Sunday, protesters took to the streets in the wake of President Trump ordering airstrikes targeting Iran's alleged nuclear facilities. Protesters gathered downtown at the Torch of Friendship, voicing their outrage on the strikes. Many held signs saying, "No U.S.-Israeli war on Iran." We spoke with the organizer of the protest, who says our tax dollars shouldn't go towards war.
We oppose regime change, we oppose occupation, and, oppose our tax dollars funding this. We should be funding programs here at home. We can see all the suffering happening all around us, and they never seem to have money to fund our needs here at home, but they have more than enough money to bomb people abroad.
Protesters in Austin are rallied against the U.S. involvement in the Israeli-Iran conflict, sending a very similar message. For the latest on the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran and what's next for the U.S., be sure to stay with news4sa.com and follow us on all our social media platforms. Following the U.S. strike on Iran, dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, experts say gas prices are likely to rise as the cost of oil surges.
Yeah, so one way that Iran could retaliate is to disrupt the flow of oil through certain parts of the Middle East. That's one of the things that President Trump will be talking about with his national security team later today. Here's Amy Kiley now with more.
This could turn into a protracted, prolonged engagement.
It's unclear if the U.S. will face an escalating military conflict with Iran after bombing its nuclear facilities over the weekend. Some demonstrators in Tehran are demanding their country respond.
If someone strikes the United States, would they not answer? Of course they would. We're not doing anything but defending ourselves.
Iranian leaders say they're skeptical about diplomacy now. President Donald Trump says he wants them to agree to stand down and make peace with Israel. Otherwise, he's floating a regime change. Some analysts say that could be the result if Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader were to die.
This is a very unstable, unpopular regime.
The War Powers Act allows Trump to use military force for 60 days, but only Congress can declare war. Lawmaker support for the strikes is falling along party lines, with a few exceptions. Meanwhile, damage assessments are still underway for the 3 bombed nuclear facilities.
Anybody who says that they have any idea whatsoever about whether these raids did anything other than create a big boom and a lot of dust has no idea what they're talking about.
Analysts say Iran might have moved some enriched uranium before the attacks.
This material could be a basis for a new and rehabilitated nuclear program.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
There's a local couple who has loved ones right now in Israel. They say they see support for Israel growing both overseas and here in the United States. Their names are Samantha and Idan Mazouz. They are part of a local Jewish community here in San Antonio. They believe the support for Israel is growing and it's stronger than they've seen in the past. They've watched the war between Israel and Iran escalate over the last few weeks, but they say Israelis remain resilient.
You just watched Israelis from around the world traveling, whether they live wherever, they all went home in the middle of a war. Like, that's pretty, says something about the people and the people of Israel.
The U.S. ambassador says the U.S. is helping coordinate flights for Americans trying to leave Israel right now. Remember, you can get updates on the Middle East conflict online. Go to our website, news4sa.com, or you can always follow us on all of our social media platforms. It's 5:43 now on this Monday morning. A group of shareholders suing Apple for lagging on AI.
And food prices are rising globally. Jane King is live at the New York Stock Exchange with those stories and much more. Good morning, Jane.
Hi, David and Marisa. Good morning. Yes, war, inflation, drought are hitting global food supplies. Staples like wheat and beef and coffee all being affected by a lack of rain. And in some cases, prices are at record highs. Now, around the world, most people get their calories from 3 staple grains: rice, wheat, and corn. So that means that weather hazards to some places can have big repercussions for food security, and bad weather in 1 or 2 of those locations can destabilize the food supply. Well, electricity prices for households have risen quickly, and they are expected to outpace inflation in the coming years. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimated in May that retail electricity prices would be higher than inflation through next year. Data centers are a major contributor to greater demand for electricity, but also the U.S. has an aging infrastructure for transmission and distribution of electric power. Well, Apple was sued Friday by shareholders in a proposed class action lawsuit that accused the company of downplaying how long it needed to integrate advanced artificial intelligence into its Siri voice assistant, which hurt iPhone sales and therefore its stock price. The complaint covers shareholders who suffer potentially hundreds of billions of dollars of losses when Apple introduced several features and improvements for its products but kept the AI changes modest. Apple did not respond to a comment about that. And Tesla began limited the robo-taxi service in Austin over the weekend. The vehicles will have safety monitors. They may not operate in bad weather. Only a small group of users have access to the service at the moment, and they pay a $4.20 flat fee per ride. Well, the S&P 500 posted a third straight losing day on Friday. The Dow was a little bit higher. Interesting markets this morning. Oil prices are actually steady. They were up quite a bit last night when they first opened on the U.S. attacks on the Iran nuclear facilities. But now they're just steady and calm, thinking the situation may be contained. And stocks are actually a tiny bit higher this morning. Live from the New York Stock Exchange, I'm Jane King. Back to you.
Marisa, you know, Jane is the pride of the state of Indiana. Jane, I'm sorry about your Pacers last night.
I know. I watched for a while, and then I was like, okay, I've got to sleep, and I'm not going to be able to sleep if I watch this game. And I did check the score this morning, but they made Indiana proud. I will say that.
And you have Caitlin Clark. So I mean,
That's right.
you got the basketball world covered there, pretty good. The great Jane King live there in New York. Jane, have a great day. Thank you.